The unexpected task. Alex leaned back in his chair, the low hum of the starship's engines filling the silence. His fingers drummed the edge of the table, a nervous habit he hadn't been able to shake since childhood. The job had been simple: fetch the merchandise, deliver it, and get paid. But this one felt different. It didn't sit right in his gut, no matter how many times he tried to push the feeling away. The call had come through his ship's comm system, an encrypted message from his employer, a shadowy organization with more influence than anyone should have in a galaxy like this. It was supposed to be just another day on the job. But instead of the usual cargo run or smuggling job, the request was strange. Alex, the voice on the other end had said, smooth and cold, like it belonged to someone who never had to raise their voice to get what they wanted. We have a task for you. We need you to secure an alien widow and her daughter. We expect you to handle it professionally. There will be a good sum in it for you. The words were delivered without any emotion, just like the man who gave the orders. It felt almost as if the widow and her daughter were nothing more than objects to be traded, like cargo. But Alex had learned not to question his employers. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask for details. He just did the job. Bring them to us, the voice had instructed. We will take it from there. And that was how Alex found himself standing in the docking bay of a forgotten space station, staring at a transport ship that looked barely able to stay in the air. The ship had a battered exterior, its once shiny hull now covered in grime and scorch marks. It was clear that whoever lived inside didn't have the luxury of a comfortable life. A quiet sigh escaped Alex's lips as he approached, already feeling the weight of the task ahead of him. He stepped up to the hatch, and it slowly slid open. Inside, two figures waited. The first was a tall alien woman, her skin a pale, almost translucent blue. Her features were sharp and regal, and her eyes, though tired, held a fierce strength. This was Zira, the widow. The other figure, standing slightly behind her, was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her skin a slightly darker shade of blue than her mother's. Her eyes were wide and full of curiosity, but there was also an edge of fear in them. Alex's heart twisted for a moment as he met the girl's gaze. He hadn't been prepared for the innocence in her eyes. He had expected them to be broken, cold, and hardened from all they had been through. Instead, there was just confusion and uncertainty. They were more human than he had imagined. "Are you Alex?" Zira's voice broke through his thoughts. It was calm, but there was a quiet sadness underneath the words. She looked at him with a mixture of hope and wariness. "I'm Zira. This is my daughter, Lyra." Alex nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, that's me. I've been told to bring you to a safe place." Zira didn't seem reassured by his words. Instead, she eyed him with suspicion, as though trying to figure out if he was the kind of man who could be trusted. "I'm just following orders," Alex said, feeling awkward under her gaze. "I don't know why, but they said you two were important." Zira's eyes darkened for a moment, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing Alex to enter the ship. Lyra was silent, watching him closely, her small hands clutching a worn blanket tightly around her. As Alex stepped into the narrow corridor, he noticed the small living space. The walls were patched up with makeshift repairs, and everything was old, broken, or repurposed. It was clear that survival had been their focus, not comfort. Zira had probably given everything for her daughter, and now they were at the mercy of whoever would take them in. The quietness in the room made Alex uneasy. He didn't know how to act. He had been told this would be a business transaction. Deliver the goods, collect the payment, and move on. But he wasn't sure how he felt about that anymore. Zira wasn't some piece of cargo. She wasn't some rare alien artifact to be sold and traded. She was a person, and her daughter. She was just a child. "Where are we going?" Zira asked after a moment, her voice softer now, tinged with exhaustion. "Do you know where we'll be taken?" Alex hesitated, trying to find the right words. I'm supposed to get you to someone who can help you. That's all I know. Zira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked down at Lyra, who was still holding onto her mother, her face pressed against her side. For a long moment, there was nothing but the hum of the engines and the distant sound of the station's low vibrations. Alex glanced back at them, his mind racing. He had only just met them, but something about their situation didn't sit right with him. He had taken on plenty of difficult jobs before, but this one was different. There was no clear reason for it, no explanation, no justification. He was supposed to be the one to hand them over. But already, something in him was beginning to change. His gut told him that this wasn't just a simple job. It was a choice. And for the first time, Alex wondered if he would make the right one. Zira's painful truth. The dim light inside the small ship flickered as Alex sat down across from Zira and Lyra. He had to admit, the closeness of their situation was starting to affect him more than he'd expected. The silence between them was thick, like the weight of unspoken words hung in the air. He wasn't sure what to say or how to say it. There was a heaviness in his chest, like he was being pulled into something far bigger than he had imagined. Zira finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, tired, yet there was a steeliness behind it that Alex couldn't ignore. "You're probably wondering why we're in this situation," she began, her eyes never leaving the floor, as if the very act of speaking the truth was too painful. "And I suppose I owe you some kind of explanation." Alex nodded, but didn't speak. He wasn't sure he could find the words to respond. He hadn't expected to hear the kind of pain in her voice that now filled the cabin. "I was born on a planet called Zalora," Zira continued. "It was peaceful, beautiful. I never imagined it could all end so quickly. But the Empire came, and they wiped us out." Her voice cracked slightly as she said it, but she quickly regained her composure. "They destroyed everything. My people, my home. All of it gone in a single night." Alex's heart sank as he listened. He had heard about wars, about planets destroyed, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it was different. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was real. Zira was real. "What happened after?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he feared breaking the fragile silence between them. She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with a kind of sorrow that seemed too heavy for one person to carry. "After the attack, I fled with Lyra. We weren't the only ones. Many survived, but not many made it off Zalora. I knew I had to keep my daughter safe, so I kept moving, always running. I thought if I could just find a place where the Empire wouldn't reach us, we could be free. But I was wrong." Alex was silent for a moment, his mind trying to absorb everything she was telling him. He had always thought of the galaxy as a place of infinite possibilities, where trade, smuggling, and power ruled. But this was different. This was about survival. And what she was describing wasn't just an enemy. It was a machine, a faceless system that consumed everything in its path. "Then, a few months ago, I heard about the human traders," Zira continued. "They're, well, not as heartless as the Empire. At least, that's what I thought. I thought they might be able to help. That's how I ended up here, on this ship." She glanced at Lyra, who was quietly curled up next to her, still holding the old blanket close. "But even among traders, there are those who see us as nothing more than goods. That's what you've been hired to do, isn't it?" Alex felt a sudden chill in the air, even though the ship's temperature was set to a comfortable level. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had known what he was supposed to do. He had known the job: deliver the alien widow and her daughter to the highest bidder, and collect his pay. But hearing it from her, the reality of what it meant to be a commodity in the galaxy, made him sick to his stomach. "I didn't want to come here," Zira said, her voice low and filled with shame. "I didn't want to ask anyone for help. But I had no choice. We were desperate. The Empire will never stop hunting us. I thought maybe I could keep Lyra safe long enough for her to have a chance at a future." Lyra stirred in her sleep, her face calm and peaceful, unaware of the conversation going on around her. Alex's gaze softened as he looked at the little girl. She was so young, so innocent. She didn't deserve any of this. None of them did. "What do you want from me, Alex?" Zira asked, her voice suddenly firm. "You've heard our story. You know what we've been through. What do you want to do with us? The galaxy is full of people who will see us as nothing more than things to be sold or destroyed. But if you see something else in us, then maybe we have a chance." Alex swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what he was expecting when he took this job. But this wasn't part of the plan. His entire life had been about following orders, keeping his head down, and staying out of trouble. But now it felt like he was standing at a crossroads. "I don't know what I want," Alex admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect you or her." He motioned toward Lyra. "I thought this was just another job. But it's not. It's not just a job. It's something else." Zira's gaze softened, but there was something else in her eyes now, something that Alex couldn't quite place. Was it hope? Or was it just a flicker of desperation? Whatever it was, it made the air around them heavier, like the weight of her expectations was now resting on him. "Then help us," Zira said simply, as if she had been waiting for him to say those words. "Help us find safety. Help us find a future." The quiet of the ship seemed to close in on him as Alex sat there, torn between the life he had known and the choice he was being asked to make. It wasn't just about saving them. It was about something deeper, something human. And for the first time in his life, Alex wasn't sure if he was ready to make that kind of decision. But as he looked at Zira and Lyra, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just here to deliver them to the highest bidder. He was here because, somehow, his own future was now tied to theirs. The unexpected choice. The engines of the ship thrummed steadily beneath Alex's feet, a constant reminder of his situation. The silence that had fallen between him, Zira, and Lyra was oppressive, a weight that seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute. Outside the viewports, the endless expanse of stars stretched out, indifferent to the chaos unfolding on the ship. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had thrown him into something much bigger than he was prepared for. He had thought that life in space, moving from one job to the next, would be simple. But now, as he sat across from Zira, the woman who had trusted him with her life, and her daughters, everything felt tangled, uncertain. He had known what his orders were. Deliver the two of them to the highest bidder. No questions asked. That was the way of the galaxy. But something about Zira's story, her quiet strength, and Lyra's innocent gaze made the entire arrangement feel like a betrayal. These weren't just people to be sold. They were victims, survivors, and Alex wasn't sure he could be the one to condemn them. "Do you regret it?" Alex asked suddenly, breaking the silence. He hadn't planned on speaking the words, but once they were out, he couldn't take them back. Zira's eyes flicked to him, her face unreadable for a moment before she looked away, staring at the floor. "Regret? What's the point of regret when you have no other options?" She spoke with a hardness that surprised Alex. "I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose to lose my people, my home, my future. But I had to choose to survive. For her," she added, glancing at Lyra, "I had no choice." There was a fire in her voice that Alex hadn't noticed before, a determination that was as fierce as it was painful. She had fought and survived the worst, and yet here she was, on the run once again. For the first time, Alex began to understand how much she had sacrificed, how much she had endured. And for what? To end up at the mercy of a stranger who was just as lost as she was. "I know this isn't easy for you," Zira continued, her voice softer now. "But I can't do this alone. I'm not asking for you to save me. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to give my daughter a life that isn't defined by loss and running. I'm asking you to help me give her that. Her words were like a sharp twist to Alex's gut. He had seen suffering before, had even caused some of it. But this felt different. The sheer vulnerability in her eyes, the unspoken plea for something better, something more than just survival, hit him harder than anything he had ever experienced. Lyra, still clutching her blanket, shifted in her seat. Her big eyes flicked up to Alex, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Alex didn't know what she saw when she looked at him. But in that moment, he saw something he hadn't expected, a glimmer of trust, a silent hope that maybe he could be the one to change things. The cold reality of what he was about to do washed over him. His orders were clear, but this wasn't just a transaction. This was a chance to make a real difference. Could he walk away from that? Alex stood up suddenly, pacing the small confines of the ship. His mind raced with thoughts, memories, and questions. He had always been a man of action, but this was something else entirely. Was he strong enough to defy the very thing that had kept him alive in this unforgiving galaxy? Would he risk his own safety for the chance of something better, something human? Alex, please. Zira's voice was barely above a whisper now. I'm asking for your help. Don't let them take her. Don't let them take us. He froze, the words cutting through his thoughts like a blade. His heart thudded in his chest, and for a moment he wondered if he had already made the choice. He hadn't agreed to anything yet, but his instincts, his humanity, were already pulling him in one direction. Alex slowly turned back toward her. He could see the exhaustion on her face, the weight of everything she had been through, the fear of what was still to come. And he could see Lyra, staring at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Why me? Alex asked quietly. Why did you choose me for this? Zira looked up at him, her gaze steady. Because I thought maybe you were different. I thought that maybe you could see past the orders and see us for what we really are, people. The room felt suffocating for a moment, as if the universe itself was waiting for him to make his decision. The weight of the choice pressed down on him. He could follow his orders. He could finish this job, walk away, and never look back. But as he looked at Zira, and then at Lyra, the thought of walking away felt like the hardest thing he would ever have to do. No, Alex said, his voice firm and certain now. I'm not going to sell you. I can't do that. Zira's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time since their encounter, a real, genuine smile appeared on her face. It was small, hesitant, but it was there. Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, as if she was afraid to believe it. I'm sure, Alex said, more confident than he had ever felt. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to keep them safe. He would protect them, whatever it took. Zira looked at him, her expression softening. Thank you. Alex nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made his choice. Now he would face the consequences. But no matter what, he knew he couldn't back out. Not now. Not after everything they had shared. It was no longer about the job. It was about something bigger, something human. And as the stars outside continued to drift by, Alex felt the weight of the universe shifting. For the first time in his life, he was truly free to make his own fate. The plan to escape. Alex's decision was made. The weight of it settled heavily on his shoulders. But there was no going back now. He could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines, almost like a heartbeat, as if the vessel itself was aware of the change in the air. He looked across at Zira and Lyra, both waiting for him to lead them out of the situation he had just refused to accept. Zira's tired eyes locked onto his. What now? She asked quietly, but there was a glimmer of hope in her gaze. It wasn't the hope of someone who expected a miracle, but of someone who saw a way out, albeit one that was unclear, full of risks. Alex stood near the ship's control panel, his mind racing through possibilities. They couldn't just stay here, stranded in the middle of deep space. The bounty hunters were still out there, searching for them, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. He needed to get them to safety. But how? He ran his fingers over the controls, calling up a holographic map of the sector. The nearest star system was a small mining colony on the edge of controlled space. Remote, unimportant to the big players in the galaxy. It was the perfect place to lay low. "We need to go to the Juno system," Alex said, tapping the map to zoom in on the sector. "It's far enough off the radar that they won't think to look for us there. It's a mining colony, not much to attract attention. We can find a place to hide, maybe even get some help from the locals." Zira leaned forward, studying the map with him. "You think it's safe there? The bounty hunters could be tracking us. They could find us anywhere." "They might," Alex admitted, "but we'll have a better chance there than anywhere else. It's a small, isolated colony. No major security forces, no planetary government to attract attention. The more remote, the safer." Zira nodded slowly, her fingers tapping the armrest of her chair as she processed the plan. "I'll follow your lead, but we have to get there without being caught." "I know," Alex said, turning to face her. "We need to move fast and quietly. No signals, no communication. We can't afford to draw attention." He moved quickly to the cockpit, settling into the pilot's chair. The ship's systems were basic, nothing fancy, just enough to get them from one place to another. He began shutting down all non-essential functions, making the ship as quiet as possible. No lights, no artificial signals. If they were going to slip past the bounty hunters, they would need every advantage they could get. Zira followed him into the cockpit, her eyes searching his face. "You really think this will work?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. "There's no guarantee they won't find us. And I can't lose Lyra again." Alex met her gaze, his expression resolute. "We'll make it work. I won't let anything happen to either of you." As he engaged the ship's thrusters and set a course for the Juno system, Alex felt the ship lurch forward, the stars outside blurring into streaks of light. For a moment, everything felt strangely calm, as though the universe had decided to hold its breath. But Alex knew better. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that day, on the ship's lower deck, Zira sat with Lyra, the two of them huddled together in the small, dimly lit cabin. The child had fallen asleep once again, her tiny body curled up against her mother. Zira stroked her daughter's hair, her expression unreadable, but Alex could see the exhaustion and worry in the way her shoulders sagged. This had to be more than she could bear. He stood by the doorway, watching them for a moment. He wasn't sure what he expected from this situation. Zira was strong, but she wasn't invincible. And Lyra, well, the little girl had already been through more than any child should ever have to experience. When Zira finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, it was as if she had been waiting for him to make the next move. "Alex," she began, her voice low, "you're doing more than I could have asked. But I can't help but wonder, why? Why are you helping us? You barely know us." Alex took a step forward, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Maybe because I've seen enough of what this galaxy does to people. Enough to know that you and Lyra don't deserve to be treated like commodities." He shrugged, trying to brush off the intensity of the moment. "I've done jobs like this before, but this feels different." Zira studied him for a long moment, as though searching for something deeper in his words. "You really don't want anything in return?" Alex smiled, a rare, almost uncomfortable expression. "I suppose I could say I'm in it for the money, but the truth is, I don't think it's about that anymore. I don't know what it's about yet, but I'll figure it out." Her lips curled into a soft smile. "You're strange, Alex, but I'm glad you're with us." For a moment, the air felt lighter between them, as if in some small way they had both accepted what was happening. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust. It was about choosing something more than just the path they had been given. And in that choice, they were finding strength. As the hours passed, the ship silently glided through the vast emptiness of space. Every hum of the engines, every flicker of the lights, seemed to echo the choices being made within. Alex wasn't sure what awaited them in the Juno system, but he knew one thing. This was no longer a simple job. This was a fight for something bigger. For the first time, he was willing to risk everything to protect something that wasn't his. For the first time, he understood what it meant to choose family over duty. The chase begins. The Juno system loomed on the ship's monitors like a distant hope, a small cluster of planets barely holding together at the edge of known space. Alex's hands gripped the controls as he steered the ship into a deeper sector of the system, away from the core where all the bustling trade and law enforcement activities were concentrated. Here, in the remote fringe, they might find the cover they desperately needed. But they also ran the risk of being isolated, vulnerable to anyone who might be looking for a quick score. Zira had been silent for most of the journey, keeping to herself and her daughter, but Alex could feel the tension in her presence. Every time their eyes met, she was silently asking if this was going to work. And every time, he didn't have a good answer to give. The silence between them was suffocating, so Alex focused on the controls. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop the constant nagging feeling in the back of his mind. The bounty hunters weren't just going to let them slip away. It was only a matter of time before they would catch up. "You need to prepare yourself," Alex said to Zira, his voice low but firm. "This place, it's not safe. No one here cares about who's running or who's being hunted. If they find us, it won't be about helping." Zira looked up from the window, where she had been staring out into the black void of space. Her eyes were filled with a quiet kind of resolve. "I've seen what people do when they're desperate. We'll be ready for them." "Good," Alex replied, nodding. "We'll need to be." As they approached the mining colony, Alex's fingers flew over the controls, adjusting the ship's speed and systems to stay under the radar. He shut down all non-essential transmissions, making the ship as invisible as possible. The last thing they needed was some automated station picking up their signal and sending out a distress call. The colony appeared on the horizon, just a small collection of industrial stations and makeshift homes orbiting a barren, rocky planet, a place where miners worked the land for precious minerals, and traders came and went in search of cheap goods. But for Alex and Zira, it was a haven, a place to disappear into the shadows. But as the ship got closer, something caught Alex's eye. A flicker on the radar, too small to be a natural object, too quick to be an asteroid. His heart skipped a beat. He zoomed in on the display. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Zira's gaze shifted from Lyra to Alex, catching the change in his demeanor. "What's wrong?" "They found us," Alex said, his voice grim. "A ship. It's not one of the locals." Zira stood up, her posture stiff with fear. "Can you outrun them?" He hesitated. The ship they were flying was fast, but not fast enough to outrun someone who had the resources to track them. Not with the amount of heat they were carrying right now. "Maybe. But it's going to get messy. You need to prepare yourself, Zira, and keep Lyra below deck. It might get rough." Zira nodded, her face hardening. She moved swiftly, rushing to Lyra's side and whispering something to the little girl. Lyra's face was pale, her wide eyes showing both fear and confusion. "What's going to happen, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice small. "Stay with me," Zira whispered, brushing her daughter's hair gently. "Everything's going to be okay." But Alex knew better than to promise that. As the ship came closer to the mining colony's edge, the enemy ship, sleek, black, and built for speed, closed in on them from behind. It was a mercenary vessel, unmistakable from its design, built for one thing: hunting people. He could see its engines flare as it boosted toward them, eager to claim its prey. "This is it," Alex said under his breath. He wasn't sure how they were going to survive this, but one thing was clear: they couldn't run anymore. He pulled the ship into a sharp dive toward the surface of the barren planet, hoping the rough terrain would throw off the mercenaries. The ship rattled with the force of the maneuver, and the gravity pushed Alex into his seat as he fought to maintain control. He glanced at Zira once more, her face tight with worry. "Hold on," Alex shouted, pushing the ship even harder. The mining colony grew closer, and in the distance, the jagged surface of the planet appeared as a chaotic landscape of craters and rocks. The enemy ship was close now, their weapons charging. Alex could see them through the viewport, a mercenary, grinning in anticipation of the kill. But Alex wasn't about to make it easy. He jerked the controls, taking the ship into a spiral, twisting and turning, hoping to break the mercenaries' lock on them. They came in low, hugging the surface of the planet, dodging craters and towering rocky spires. Every move felt like a calculated risk. One wrong turn, and they'd crash. But it was their best chance. The mercenary ship followed suit, a perfect mirror of their every move, and Alex could feel the sweat gathering on his brow. "Get to the rear hatch," Alex called back to Zira. "I'm not sure how long we can keep this up." The ship's warning systems began to wail as the mercenary ship fired a shot, a plasma bolt shooting just inches from their tail. The impact shook the ship violently, and the hull groaned under the pressure. Alex's heart raced. They were running out of time. Zira's voice came through the comms, steady but urgent. "Can we land?" "Anywhere." Alex's eyes darted across the monitors. "There's an old mining depot not far from here. It's hidden in a ravine. If we can make it, we can lose them in the terrain." "Do it," Zira replied. With a deep breath, Alex slammed the thrusters forward, pushing the ship as fast as it would go. The planet below them grew larger as they plummeted toward the surface, the terrain looking more unforgiving the closer they got. The mercenaries weren't backing off. In fact, they were closing in fast. Alex could almost feel the pulse of their weapons charging up again. Come on," Alex muttered to himself, his hand shaking as he fought to keep the ship on course. He could hear Zira's voice through the comms, steadying herself as she prepared for the worst. He had no idea what would happen if they got caught, but he knew it wouldn't be pretty. As the surface of the planet neared, Alex made one final, desperate maneuver. Into the depths. The ship's engines roared, the metal hull groaning under the strain as Alex pulled the craft into a sharp dive toward the ravine. His fingers were slick with sweat, and his pulse raced. Every inch of the barren planet's surface was littered with jagged rocks and craters, creating a deadly maze. But to Alex, it wasn't just terrain, it was their last chance. Behind them, the mercenary ship followed without hesitation, its engines screaming as it matched their dive. The sound of plasma blasts echoed through the comms, each shot missing by mere inches. The enemy was relentless, but Alex wasn't going to let them have it. Not now. "Hang on," he shouted, forcing the ship lower, threading the needle between two massive rock formations. The ship jolted as it scraped against the side of one, and Alex grimaced, but there was no time to worry about that now. The mercenaries were closing in, and they needed to lose them. Fast. Zira was silent now, clinging to the back of the cockpit, her face tight with fear, but there was no time for words. She was already moving toward the rear hatch, ready to make a run for it the second they hit the ground. Alex couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He had promised her safety, but in a place like this, with a bounty on their heads, there was only so much he could do. The mining depot was just ahead, a weathered, abandoned structure hidden deep within a ravine. It had been forgotten by most, left to rot under the weight of time and neglect. But to Alex, it was their lifeline. If they could get there, they could vanish into the shadows, and the mercenaries would have no idea where to look. The ship's sensors started to blink red, warning him of an incoming missile. Alex cursed under his breath and slammed the controls forward, tilting the ship into a steep climb. The missile shot past them, so close that Alex felt the heat from the blast on his face. "We're almost there," Alex muttered, voice steady but taut with tension. He pushed the ship harder, the thrusters kicking into overdrive. The ravine was only a few kilometers away. The enemy ship was just seconds behind. Zira's voice crackled over the comms. "You think we can lose them in there?" "We have to." Alex grunted, eyes never leaving the rocky path ahead. "It's our only shot." As they neared the entrance to the ravine, Alex made a sharp turn, hugging the cliffside. The enemy ship tried to follow, but the narrow passage was too tight. One wrong move, and it would be a fatal collision. The mercenaries' ship tried to fire again, but it was no use. The shots hit the rocks instead of their target. Then, without warning, Alex threw the ship into a spin. The ship spiraled out of control for a moment before he regained balance. It was a gamble, but it worked. The mercenary ship was now caught in the tight gap between the rocky walls of the ravine, unable to maneuver. But they were not out of danger yet. The enemy wasn't alone. The moment the ship entered the ravine, a hidden turret activated, its plasma cannons opening fire on them. The sky above erupted in sparks as the ship's shields flickered. Alex gritted his teeth, desperately trying to avoid the incoming blasts. "Not good," he yelled, swerving to dodge the fire. The ship was still intact, but barely. They needed to land now, before the turret tore them apart. The mining depot was just ahead, its decaying silhouette barely visible against the rocky landscape. There was no time to slow down. Alex aimed the ship straight for the depot's landing pad and hit the throttle, pushing everything the ship had left. "We're going down," Alex shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The ship slammed into the ground with a bone-jarring thud, throwing Alex forward in his seat. The impact sent a shockwave through the entire vessel. Warning lights flared on every display as the ship skidded to a stop. The landing gear had held. Barely. Alex let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding in his chest. They were down. Safe, for now. Zira was already out of her seat, grabbing Lyra and pulling her toward the rear hatch. "Let's move," she urged, her voice tight with fear. "We need to get inside before they catch up." Alex didn't waste any time. He followed them quickly, glancing back at the ship. The mercenaries would be close, too close. The depot was their only refuge. They had to reach it before the enemy arrived. They ran as fast as they could, Zira holding Lyra close, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Alex stayed at the rear, his hand resting on the sidearm holstered at his waist. If anyone was going to try something, he was ready. As they reached the entrance of the depot, Zira stopped, looking over her shoulder. The sounds of the mercenary ship could still be heard in the distance, its engines roaring as it tried to navigate the ravine. "They'll be here any minute," Zira said, voice low but steady. "We're not giving up," Alex replied firmly, his eyes scanning the decrepit building. There were signs of life here. Old cargo crates stacked in a corner, makeshift barriers set up around the perimeter. Someone had been here recently. It was just a matter of who. He motioned for Zira and Lyra to stay close as he moved forward, ready to confront whatever, or whoever, was waiting for them. But as they entered the building, a voice from the shadows made them freeze. "You're in the wrong place, friend," the voice said, gravelly and low. Alex turned to face the newcomer, hand on his weapon. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a rugged-looking man, his face hardened by years of living on the fringes of space. His eyes were sharp, and he held a blaster in one hand, the other resting on a rusted tool. "I'm the one who decides who stays and who goes," the man said with a sneer. Zira's breath caught in her throat. "We don't want trouble. Just help us." The man's eyes flicked to the ship outside, and then back to Alex. "You're running from someone, huh? You must be pretty important if they're chasing you like that." Alex didn't answer. He couldn't afford to. The mercenaries were close, and this man was their only hope. For a moment, the man just stared at them, his expression unreadable. Then finally, he spoke. "You've got one shot. You either trust me or you don't. I'll get you to safety, but you'll owe me." Alex didn't hesitate. He nodded, his decision made. "We'll trust you," he said. The final gamble. The dim light from the ravine crept through the crumbling walls of the mining depot, casting long shadows across the abandoned rooms. Alex, Zira, and Lyra huddled near the entrance, waiting for the stranger to make his move. The sound of the mercenaries' ship was getting closer, its engines growling like a predator closing in on its prey. Every second felt like a lifetime. The stranger, a rugged man who had yet to reveal his name, stood a few paces away, observing the ship through a crack in the door. His hand never strayed far from the old blaster holstered at his side. Alex could sense the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The mercenaries weren't far behind. They wouldn't have time to get comfortable here. "We need to move now," Alex said, voice low but urgent. His heart pounded in his chest. The ship outside was still intact, but it wouldn't be for long if they didn't act fast. "Where are we going?" The stranger turned his cold eyes toward Alex. "You think you can run from them?" he asked with a half-smirk. "You're on their list now. No safe places left for you. But if you're smart, you'll follow me." Zira stepped forward, her hand clutching Lyra's. "We don't have time for games. Tell us where we go, or we leave you behind." The stranger studied her for a moment, the silence between them sharp and taut. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he gestured toward the far corner of the depot. "Follow me," he said, voice finally carrying a hint of resolve. "You'll be safe if you come with me. For now." Alex glanced at Zira. They had no choice. The mercenaries would be on them soon. If they didn't trust this man, they were as good as dead. But trusting him was a gamble. "Lead the way," Alex said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The stranger moved swiftly, almost gliding across the room. His movements were practiced. He had clearly done this before. Alex and Zira followed closely, keeping a sharp eye on the door. They reached a narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the depot. The stairs creaked underfoot, but they held steady. There was no turning back now. The deeper they descended, the cooler the air became. It was almost like the temperature dropped with every step they took, a sign of how far below the surface they were. Finally, they reached the bottom level, a large chamber filled with old, rusted equipment and empty crates. It was a place forgotten by time, untouched by the hands of those who had once worked here. But there was something else here, too, a network of underground tunnels, stretching deep into the planet's crust. "This is where the real hiding happens," the stranger said, his voice low and almost reverent. "People like you, people who need to disappear, they come here. Nobody looks for you in the deep mines." Zira's face was tight with unease. She was clutching Lyra even tighter, as though the little girl might disappear in an instant. Alex could feel her fear, but he had to remain calm. They didn't have the luxury of doubt now. Alex nodded. "What's the plan?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. He motioned for them to follow as he moved toward a darkened doorway at the far end of the chamber. Inside, a large control panel hummed softly, displaying various readings. The man began typing something into the panel, his fingers moving quickly over the keys. "What are you doing?" Alex asked, unable to hold back his suspicion. "Making sure you're not followed," the stranger replied, not looking up. "You think they'll just let you go? They've got eyes everywhere. I'm scrambling the signals. If we're lucky, they won't even know we've left this place. But we don't have much time. Once they figure it out, they'll be on us fast." Zira stepped forward. "How long will this take?" The stranger didn't look up from the console. "Not long enough," he muttered, "but long enough to give us a head start. If we're smart, we can lose them in the tunnels." Alex's hand tightened around his sidearm. He had no idea if this man could be trusted, but they didn't have a choice. If the mercenaries found them in the tunnels, it would be even worse. It was a final gamble. If they got caught, there was nowhere to run. As the stranger continued his work, the sound of the mercenary ship outside grew louder, its engines growling with menace. Alex's pulse quickened. Every second they wasted here was another second closer to being found. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp, unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. The mercenaries were on the ground. "They've landed," Alex said, his voice a whisper. "We don't have much time." The stranger hit a final key on the console and turned to face them. "The way is clear. Go. Now." Alex nodded, motioning for Zira and Lyra to follow. They moved quickly, entering the darkened tunnel beyond the door. The walls were damp and cold, but there was no time to notice the discomfort. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, and the further they moved, the darker it became. It was impossible to see anything beyond a few feet in front of them. Zira stumbled slightly, her grip on Lyra tightening. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice filled with doubt. "For now," Alex answered, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He had no idea where this tunnel would lead or what dangers lay ahead, but they had no other choice but to keep going. Behind them, the echo of footsteps became faint, but they still weren't out of the woods. The stranger, leading the way with practiced precision, motioned for them to keep moving faster. "We're close," he said, his voice low. "Once we reach the lower levels, you'll be safe. Just stay quiet and stay close." The air grew heavier, and the sense of urgency grew with each step. The tunnel twisted and turned, and Alex could feel his muscles tightening from the effort of moving so quickly through the darkness. It was the final push. If they made it, they would be free. If not, there would be no escape. And then, without warning, the stranger stopped. "I've led you this far," he said quietly, turning to face them one last time. "But this is where I leave you." Alex froze, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean, leave us?" The stranger's expression was unreadable. "I've done my part. The rest is up to you. You won't be safe for long, but you'll have a chance." Zira stepped forward. "But why?" The stranger's eyes softened for a brief moment. "Because you're the ones who can finish this. You're the ones who can make it right." His voice grew quieter, almost to a whisper. "But there's a price. Everything has a price." Before Alex could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows of the tunnel, leaving them in the eerie silence of the underground. For a moment, Alex stood frozen, uncertain what to make of the man's words. But then, with a deep breath, he turned to Zira. "We've come this far," he said, voice steady. "We finish this together." And with that, they pressed on into the depths, the final gamble having only just begun.